Hi, I'm Andy Weibel, and welcome to Timely Topics. Today we're talking with TerryMacAllister, a longtime Muskegon resident and activist in his community and lives downtown. And we're going to be talking about gay bars, New York City, Stonewall, and also the massacre in Orlando. Thanks for being on the show, Terry.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So let's talk a little bit about your time, why you moved to New York City. You were in Muskegon. You grew up here for the most part.
Born and raised, as were parents, grandparents.
Wow.
So my roots are deep in Muskegon. After I graduated, I came back to Muskegon and taught school for 4 years, but the summer that I graduated from college, I spent in Europe, and really from Amsterdam to Athens, and that had always been a goal of mine, and I was fortunate to have, been able to do that out of school. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. I wanted to see more of what was on the other side of the mountain. I taught for 4 years, and
here in Muskegon.
In Muskegon, and within that 4-year period, did come out as gay. But back then, in the late '60s, it was certainly not a big coming out party.
So when you say you came out to friends, family?
No, I acknowledged my sexuality. I had never actively engaged until I was 26, but from the time I was 5, I knew that I had an attraction to men, and dated women, all the way through. But finally thought, okay, I think it's time to take a look at this other part of my personality. So I suppose in that respect, that was one of the motivations for my just saying, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to Europe, and I have a begin date, but I don't have an end date. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did, and that was the summer of 1969, which of course in June was when Stonewall happened, and I should go back in a journal and check when I went through New York going to Europe, but I don't remember a lot of that. I don't remember the whole Stonewall thing.
Was there a feeling at the time that you could sense that something like that was going to happen, though, that like we're not going to take it anymore?
Not really. Coming from Muskegon, I was not connected to what I would consider, the gay underground or information lines.
Mm-hmm. And you say the gay underground, was that kind of how being gay was at the time, underground?
Yeah. Back then, if I was very cautious, and you were always looking over your shoulder if you were in a situation with another man. Or
how did you meet people? We didn't have phone apps and things like that.
It was primarily through the bar.
Okay.
And we did have one in Muskegon. But even that, I was involved in community theater, and community theater draws those of us with
Right.
persuasion. So, and I, as I say, I came out over the course of about a year, and then I left.
Yeah.
And as I say, traveled in Europe and played over there.
Did you find things more accepting in Europe at that time, or being openly gay? Or?
That whole aspect, I think I was more or less oblivious to it. Because I didn't, it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain. But I was cautious, because you knew that was not an acceptable role to play, and so you just had your playbook and played that accordingly. Not that it really bothered me. Coming back to New York.
And so in 1969, you did come back to New York.
And I came back the end of '69, so I was there. I was in Europe about 5-6 months, and then was immersed in New York because I shared an apartment with a high school friend, and he had a whole round of friends.
Of gay friends, or
no,
straight
no,
friends?
Straight.
Yeah.
And so I lived on the Upper East Side and dated girls on the East Side, and I played and dated men on the Upper West Side. So Central Park was the dividing line.
Huh?
And
why do you think you were doing both of those things at that time?
Well,
sounds like a kind of two different lives.
It was.
Yeah.
It was, but that was the way you lived then.
Huh.
And as I say, I had only been out a couple of years, so my whole experience was very limited until I got to New York. And then that's when, the whole thing opened up, and at that point, New York was a movable feast. I mean, I think Stonewall just opened everything up and said, we're here and we're queer and it's okay.
Yeah.
And I would often spend some Saturday nights back then it was called the Continental Baths, and it was a huge building on the Upper West Side in the old Hansonia Hotel, and you would go in and you'd rent a locker or you'd rent a room and you'd put your towel around you, and then there were swimming pools and restaurants and a huge dance floor, and that's where I saw Bette Midler and Barry Manilow was her accompanist. I saw her a half a dozen times. In fact, it was the Continental Baths and the whole gay community that launched her career.
So how many people are we talking in these baths?
Thousands.
Really?
Because there were floors, there were levels, and there was a lot going on some of those levels. But it was a big social kind of event as well, and it was just great fun. Great fun.
I bet.
There were other bars that were a little more focused in their interests, but the whole bar scene just kind of started to emerge, I think, after Stonewall. Yes, there were bars, but when you read the history of what Stonewall went through, you had to be careful.
Yeah, and did you, during that time, Stonewall started with the bar getting raided by the police.
Right.
By the time you moved there, 6 months or less after it happened, was that a concern that they were going to raid gay bars?
No, I never. There were a couple of bars on the Upper East Side, Uncle Charlie's and East, and that was kind of my
Uncle Charlie's is still there.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, no doubt.
Yeah.
And so those were kind of the hangouts, and that was where you went to meet people, other than cruising on the street and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think we want to get into that.
Well, that was another place. I mean, again, you had to meet people somehow.
Right.
So it was bars, parks, general meeting areas, streets that you knew people hung out.
Yes.
So was it liberating once you got to New York? Would you call it that?
Yes, very liberating. I felt, apart and alive with my sexuality, and albeit kind of east and west, and before that, in dating women, there were a couple of times when I came very close to getting married, and I just have to share and say that I knew in my heart that that was not fair, that I was being dishonest, and never, never did that. My transition in New York was to say, okay, you can't be unfair anymore, even in a casual relationship. And I really, at that point kind of backed out of dating women and pretty much exclusively saw men. So, and I had a couple of relationships that were meaningful while I was there.
Did you were you aware of or part of any activism in New York City
Not
at that
at
time?
all. No, I wasn't. And I suppose, as you bring it up and as I think about it just off the top of my head, I guess I was just too focused on myself and what all of this meant and to me, and to be actively then involved in extending that to others. So, no, I was not.
I think what we know of is like gay parades and well, we now celebrate the whole month of June as Pride Month, but a Pride parade started in '70, the year after.
Right.
Did you?
No, I didn't.
It wasn't that big that you would have heard
wasn't.
about it.
And I suspect, even then, I still labored with that dichotomy of gay straight.
Being a part of something where you're out there.
And I ran around with a whole cadre of really wonderful men and women, gay or not gay, but primarily straight, on the east side, and we had I had a share in a summer house out in Fire Island, and although not in any of the gay communities, but so I had a very active social life, straight social life too, which I enjoyed, which was very much a part of my.
And did they know about your gay side? No?
No. No. Back then, it was that. And
were you afraid at the time? People who were known to be gay would lose their job, possibly be required to have counseling, things like that. Was that one reason that you were, or a couple of reasons why you were reluctant?
I suspect that was at the back of my mind. It was just that I didn't want to bring that together, bring all of that stuff together. I suppose more that I didn't know how, that I was, really a novice in kindergarten dealing with the physical manifestation of my sexuality at that point. So, like I say, I was more focused on me than I was on bringing that out.
And so what were bars like then? You mentioned the Continental Baths, which kind of a bath and a bar and show place.
Yeah,
it was everything.
It was huge. I mean, it was restaurants and
that was more.
That was more like a theme park.
and this was in an old hotel. I mean, was this a place where was it pretty well known? Obviously, with thousands of people there, but was it still kind of? You had to get through the door, and you had to.
Yeah, it was, and there were, often on the weekend you'd wait in line for an hour to get in.
Was it like in the basement, in the top floors?
No, it was. You came in. I can't remember what the side street was, but you came in an entrance, and which was not glaring and no neon. But you went into the main area, and this building took up a whole city block. I mean, it was a huge building. There was a whole apartment part of it, and
I've seen pictures of the building.
It's huge.
Massive,
it was huge, and but this part had an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and then there were you went up 3 or 4 floors where it were little rooms and things.
Because I mean, at the time, was it? I mean, you wouldn't. It was tough for people to take people home. Maybe in your
Right.
case, right?
Yeah, I couldn't.
I didn't. And so it made it difficult to date. So that's why these places like the Continental Baths existed,
Right.
really, and maybe don't
True.
today so much.
True.
Was it? How about? I know a lot of gay bars were kind of hard to find. You know, they didn't stand out, as you said. There wasn't a marquee. Was that the case for a lot of gay bars at the time? You kind of had to know where they were. They didn't put their rainbow flag out.
Oh no! There was no rainbow flag.
I think that came later, but
they were. There were a number of bars in the village that were more obscure. The couple bars that were on the Upper East Side were like neighborhood bars.
Okay.
They weren't big. They would have a dance floor, but they weren't big, gaudy kinds of establishments. And there was always a bouncer at the front. I mean, you had to go through and get carded and all of that. And so, yeah, they were not hiding, but they weren't broadcasting either.
I see.
It was, you kept it on the, I hate to say the down low, but you kept it they were at a lower key.
Now, a lot of people, I think, would think of the 60s and early 70s as like free sex and it's all, sexual revolution and whatnot. But it was actually fairly still conservative at that time.
Well, it was truly a revolution in terms of sexuality and what was available. And while I would look at the Continental Baths as being, for the great majority of people who were out, there were also segmented bars where your interests lie, whether you're a bear or whether you're a twink or whether you're into S&M and leather or, so there were bars
and lesbian
that were
bars
associated that way.
Yeah.
And I will say, even after I left New York, I would go back a couple times a year, and the whole number of bars just increased.
Yeah.
Until the AIDS crisis.
Right, which hit in
and
early 1980s.
that really decimated it decimated a whole generation, but that really curtailed a lot of that activity. And for me, I was in New York for about 3 years, but toward the end I thought, this isn't going to be healthy. And there was that trigger in the back of my mind, and as I say, my spirit guide said, I think it's time for us to leave.
Yeah.
And and I did. And I would say that I was very fortunate, because I think if I had continued, I could have been one of those casualties.
Sure, I'm sure that. I think if I would have been born 10 years earlier, I probably would have been too. So.
Yeah.
I know eventually came back to Muskegon.
I did.
And you lived openly gay in Muskegon for the most part, didn't you?
Well, openly from the standpoint that I did not, if anybody asked me, fine.
Yeah.
I mean, are you gay? Yeah. I think the New York years probably developed in me a presence or an attitude that if you have a problem with my sexuality, that's not mine. That's not my problem. That's yours.
Right.
And so I'm not going to let it or allow it to be my problem. And that attitude I brought back to Muskegon, and never felt that I had to apologize or hide. Yet, even being in a couple of relationships, if we were affectionate to each other, I can remember looking over my shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just part of that ingrained caution and
your partner, Dan, how long were you two together?
Dan and I were together 28 years.
28 years, wow.
Yep.
And lived the whole time openly in downtown Mesquite?
Yep. Well, I had a relationship, a 5-year relationship before I met Dan, and during that time I was active in the whole aspect of historic restoration preservation, and out of that was urged to run for city commission,
Mm-hmm.
which I did at the end of, or the latter part of the 70s. And, you know, that was a wonderful experience. I never expected to win,
Mm-hmm.
but I did. And I was living openly with another man, and I can remember at the same time, a good friend, a woman friend of mine, Bev Geyer, was running. We both ran at the same time, and she was very active in the women's movement. And there were a group of, what I heard through the grapevine, a group of police and firemen who were actively campaigning against us because they said, well, do you really want to have a fag and a woman's liber on the city commission? Which I thought was pretty amusing. But nonetheless, I won, and I have never felt that my sexuality impeded what I wanted to do in terms of my community activism. Mm-hmm. And I can probably count on 2 fingers the number of times that I felt I was being discriminated against because of my sexuality. Mm-hmm. And both of them were in kind of a business standpoint. Mm-hmm. So, no, I.
And what do you think of changes that have happened over the years in terms of people being more out, and political changes we've had with gay marriage? Are those things, were those even things you thought about, being married to another man when you were 26? Or?
If and I lost Dan 7 years ago, but when he died. But if you had asked me 7 years ago, or even 5 years ago, if I would ever see gay marriage, I would have said, in your dreams. Yeah. You know, how quickly that came still just amazes me. Mm-hmm. And I am so happy because now you don't have to fight, or I mean, you don't have to fear. And although I think Orlando has shown us that we really do still need to be cautious. And for me, this whole political season has just totally ripped the underbelly of this society open in all of its what's nasty and
some
bigoted,
backlash
and I will see how it all turns out, but that is a fear that I have going forward. Yeah. That there could be a backlash, and that some of the things that are being said now would never have been said 2-3 years ago. Yeah. And it's becoming commonplace, and hate and bigotry is being far more accepted. So
that general atmosphere has allowed things like this. What were your thoughts when, I know I woke up on Sunday morning and the news was about Orlando and what had happened? I mean, I know you said a little bit, but...
I didn't ignore it. I kind of filtered my news intake, and while we still unfortunately are contending with these mass shootings and all of that it was a part of my tribe, if you will.
Often gay people talk about each other as family, and it was kind of like your family being
Right.
hit.
And because it's an emotional thing.
Sure. Sure.
So
Yeah.
that
I mean,
said,
it's-
I really kind of
Those
cipher
bars you-
out.
Yeah.
It still it hurts.
Yeah.
It just hurts. If you care.
Sure. I know when you said,
I'm sorry.
that's all right.
That just came up and grabbed me. But it was like gay marriage. When that happened, that Saturday, that we had that window in Muskegon, Marcia, my friend and my next door neighbor, had set up the potential of gay marriages happening at the Unitarian Church. And she called me and she said, it's going to happen. We're going to make it happen. I sat down at my counter and I watched some Facebook footage of what was going on. And I wanted to go, but I was in a heap of tears. It was just so wonderful and so emotional to see that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it just gets me.
Yeah. And I think one of the terms that's been used lately is kind of the gay bars and similar places were kind of sanctuaries, and that's been infused with Orlando. And then, we had such joy one year and then such sorrow the next in our family.
It's true. But as I say, I think my tribe is very resilient. I mean, we have had to put up with a lot. I consider myself very lucky that I haven't, but I know a lot of men have. So the gay bar was where you could be you, where you could be comfortable, where you didn't have to look over your shoulder. And like I say, with them being segmented, you were with people that you had something in common with. Not only your sexuality, but interests and so on. So, yes. And now I suppose, or I suspect, the natural progression, while I don't think of it as necessarily natural, that natural progression to the apps on your phone really kind of precludes the necessity of going to a bar anymore.
Yeah.
But what it lacks is that whole human interaction.
That community.
And that's what I think is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Unfortunate.
Yeah. I hope still we'll have the gay bars around.
I do. Oh, I do.
I remember the first time I went to a gay bar, I was like, oh my gosh, there's excitement, liberation, and all that. So hopefully others will get that feeling too. So. Well, thanks for being on the show, Terry.
My
Sharing
pleasure.
your stories and all you've done in Muskegon over the years. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for watching Timely Topics. We've been talking to Terry MacAllister, longtime resident of Muskegon, and about his time in New York City and about gay bars and Orlando and many other topics. And I hope you enjoyed the show and have a great day.